Hey everyone, welcome to podcast number 10, Westward Expansion, 1860 to 1895. Topics to be covered today are going to be federal aid and expansion, agriculture on the Great Plains, mining and ranching in the West, the last stand of the Native Americans, populism, and the impact of the American West on American culture. So, let's get this one under 10 minutes, and this time I mean it, 10 minutes. Let's go. Alright, so the federal government does a lot to aid in the expansion of the West. Okay, a couple big laws or acts that you need to know are going to be the Homestead Act and the Moral Land Grant Act. Okay, essentially what both of these do is kind of gives land in one way or the other to the American public. The Homestead Act gives 160 acres to any settler who would farm for at least 5 years. Unfortunately, many of these guys did not do so well. The land was very difficult to farm. It's much drier out there, kind of in the Great Plains area, so a lot of people weren't sure on how to successfully farm those regions. The Moral Land Grant Act was basically land that was given to states to promote public education, and so many states were able to take that land and put colleges on it, or they could sell the land, make the money they needed to set up colleges. And so a lot of some of your more famous colleges, like for instance the University of Wisconsin or Texas A&M, are colleges that were founded because of this act. Okay. Also notice that many of these are passed during the Civil War, when the Republicans had no opposition in Congress, pretty much. You also see the transcontinental railroads, which I cannot emphasize this enough. The transcontinental railroads are going to just transform America by making it possible to settle the West. Okay. Because we think of all these Great Plains states like Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, the South Dakota or whatever, where they grow all this food. If you just grew all that food out there, but you had no way to transport it, what would be the point, right? You're just going to grow all this corn in the middle of nowhere. Who's going to eat it? And so the Transcontinental Railroad really makes it possible for some of this land to become economically viable, much like how the Erie Canal in New York would allow that region to become an economic powerhouse. The transcontinental railroads transformed the West, transformed the Great Plains, and that's obviously very important. Okay, Union Pacific, Central Pacific are always the two names of the companies that built these railroads. Okay, agriculture on the Great Plains. Basically, kind of sum it up real short here. We start seeing these kind of large-scale farms popping up called bonanza farms, and these guys are very, very good at growing crops. Unfortunately, with this new technology, everyone's producing more food. Okay, but when you have supply rising without demand, as you might have learned in economics class, that's going to bring prices, crashing down. And so we see all this farm produce coming out here, but there's not a big demand for it. Okay, so the prices continue to fall. And if you're a farmer and the price of something that you sell goes down, you're going to need more money. So how do you get more money? If you're short on cash, the answer is I'm a farmer. I make money by selling crops. These farmers would then produce more crops. So, oh my God, I'm not making enough money. The price is too low. Let's make more, which I'm sure they understood was kind of dumb, but what choice did they have? And so these farmers responded to crashing prices by making more food, which further suppresses farm prices. And that's a typo I just noticed where it says farm rices. It should be prices. Whoops. So anyways, that's going to make it very difficult for many of these farmers to make it on the Great Plains. And so it's a very challenging thing. Anyways, what we also notice about the West is that they're very, very progressive. Okay, if you look at that map right there, that map's going to show you when states gave women the right to vote. Okay, and which states had like partial and which states had no women's suffrage. Okay, by 1919. And what we can see here, guys, is that the West is where we're going to see women getting suffrage the soonest. Okay, Wyoming being the first in 1890. Kansas being giving women the right to vote in 1887 in a couple towns, not statewide, but a couple towns. Okay, and so we're seeing that women have a much different role in society in the West. Okay, many people say that because in the West everyone works on the farm, everyone's a farmer. Women kind of had the same kind of jobs as men did. There wasn't that kind of it wasn't the same as the East Coast where women kind of had those very specific kind of gender roles. In the West, it was very different. So you could argue that in the West, women were respected more, and that reflected in their getting the vote sooner than in the East Coast. Also, what we see happening in the West is we see a lot of African Americans leaving the fiercely racist region here in the South and trying to find a better life out west. In fact, there's a large group of African Americans that move out west to become farmers. And these guys are called exodusters. Okay, there's also a lot of African Americans who actually work as cowboys as well. And so there's a very rich history for African Americans in the West. Okay, a lot of mining goes on during this period. There's discovery in gold. There's discovery of gold and silver. There's gold found in Colorado. There's silver found in Nevada. Obviously, a lot of people know that the California gold strike in '48 led to the rush in '49, which is where the term 49ers comes from. But you have all this wealth in minerals being found, out here in the West. Okay, we would also see happening. One of the interesting things that we'd see because of the miners is you would have these boom towns that would pop up because there would be gold found or silver found, and all these people would rush to an area to mine for that. And then once the mining turned out to be ineffective or what have you, they would just leave, and these towns would actually collapse. They become ghost towns. So we start to see like boom towns and ghost towns kind of littered throughout the West. And some boom towns, make it big, but many of these towns kind of just, fall apart, I guess. Okay, ranching becomes a big deal as well in the West. You have the long drives that take place mainly in Texas. Texas is great for grazing, and we see the good old cowboy come into play here. The cowboys, are part of this ranching business where they take all these cattle from Texas and drive them north to these terminal points where they can then be taken to the East Coast or the West Coast. It really helps that you have these refrigerated train cars that allow for meat to be, traveled far, long distances away, so you can go ahead and meet the demand for beef. But the problem is that eventually this way of life kind of ends. The railroads, while the railroads help the ranchers by taking their products back and forth, what the railroads also do is it brings farmers out into these regions, and the farmers don't want cattle walking all over their crops. And so what farmers start to do is put up barbed wire fences and essentially stop these long drives. And so the period of the cowboy, while for whatever reason it's an incredible part of our culture and everyone seems to really enjoy those good old Western movies, the days of the cowboy did not last very long. It was a couple decades, and then it was done. But it definitely left its mark on many Americans. Okay, it's not all good news going out west. There's a lot of tragedy that takes place in the West, and one of those tragedies is what happens to the Native Americans. The Native Americans basically lose their freedom, lose their sovereignty, so to speak, and they have a couple little Indian wars that take place after the Civil War. One of the more famous battles of the Indian Wars was the Battle of Little Bighorn, where the Sioux were able to annihilate some American forces in South Dakota. But what happens for the Plains Indians, at least, is that the buffalo that they depended on were basically being eradicated by overhunting. By whites and Indians. Also, the railroads are affecting them, but basically the buffalo go away, and the Sioux can't survive. The last quote-unquote battle of the Indian Wars was the massacre at Wounded Knee, where through some confusion, the Sioux and American troops had what some people call a battle, some people call a massacre, but that is kind of the last large-scale violence between the Plains Indians and the American troops. Okay, once the Native Americans have been put on reservations, what we see happening is that the United States tries to assimilate the Native Americans into white culture or white America. We see the Dawes Act getting passed in 1887, which basically dissolves the tribes, okay, and seeks to educate and civilize Native Americans. They were even given white names in some cases. But there was an effort to turn these guys into farmers, to make them Christians, to make them accept the idea of private property, not tribal property, and like I said, to really kind of Americanize these people. And it was pretty successful for the most part. Many Native Americans were, basically forced to assimilate into white culture. And if you look at like Native American culture today, there's been somewhat of a resurgence. But you look at some of the languages that are being lost and some of the traditions that are being lost, and Native Americans have been slowly being pushed out. Native American culture, Native American way of life, have been slowly being pushed out for the last 400 years, to the point now where there's very few of them left. So anyways, moving on. As I kind of alluded to before, farmers are having a tough time out in the plains, out in the West, mainly because they're so productive. In addition to that, there's other hurdles that they have to face to be successful. Number one, there's high tariffs that are put on their produce. The high tariffs are put there to help the Eastern industrialists to protect the American industry from European competition, but that hurts the American farmer, much like it hurt the American South prior to the Civil War. Also at this time, we see a tight money policy taking place, where the government's really trying to fight inflation and keep it from happening. And basically, they set us to the gold standard, meaning that the gold standard means that for every dollar, or every $100, make it easier, every $100 of currency we have $100 of gold to back that up. So for every single cent that is out there, there's gold to back up that money. Okay, and so as a result, there's no inflation. All right, and many farmers believe that this is causing their farm prices to drop. Okay, and they're actually it's harder for them to get out of debt, because when you take out a loan, if I take out a $100,000 loan, okay, but every year inflation happens and my buying power goes up, or I'm making more money just because of inflation, it gets easier to pay off debt. And so if inflation's not happening and farm prices are dropping, it's going to make it very hard for farmers to make it. Okay, and eventually farmers try to organize and help make themselves successfully. So you have the Grange, which is an organization of Western farmers. These guys try to buy in bulk to get lower prices, much like how Walmart or Costco or Sam's Club, they buy in bulk to get lower prices. So the farmers buy the seeds or machinery in bulk to get good deals. They encourage paper currency to basically create a little bit of inflation here, to give them a little bit of relief to pay down their debt, to make some more money. They also seek to regulate railroads more, because they believe the railroads are hosing them and charging them too much for their rates, so they want to fix that. And the farmers even unite into a political party known as the Populist Party of 1892. And what these guys seek to do is join forces with the industrial workers and basically form a political party that defends kind of the working American, okay, farmers and factory workers. Their platform is going to include things like, getting the government more involved in economic affairs, not this laissez-faire approach that we typically associate with industrialization. They're going to push for paper currency to jack up inflation so that they can pay down that debt, that they can make money. They don't want to see the gold standard. They're going to want in fact, if they're going to stay with the gold standard, let's mine more gold, let's mine more silver so that we can get more money out there. They're going to push for a progressive income tax, which is huge, and is what we have today, where if you're middle class, you pay this percent, but if you're wealthier, you're going to pay a higher percent. Okay, and they're going to, obviously that's going to eventually happen, of course. They're going to push for more direct democracy, so they're going to push for greater access of the people to the government. So they're going to push for things like referendums, which means a referendum means that the people get to vote on on a law. They're gonna push for initiatives when the people can propose a law. They're gonna push for recalls where people can remove people from office. They're also going to try to attract industrial workers by pushing for 8-hour workdays. Okay, so here we see these farmers uniting, and while they're somewhat successful in some aspects, I mean there are a couple populist candidates that might get elected locally. They're never successful at actually getting a candidate elected. The Democrats do kind of adopt the populist party, and they run William Jennings Bryan as their candidate, but he never wins. Okay, but anyways, kind of wrapping it up here. What we see is during this period between 1865 and 1900 is we see the frontier is gone. You know, Americans have moved at an incredible rate and have settled all of this territory, which is kind of interesting because Thomas Jefferson was famously quoted as saying it would take 500 years to fill up the Louisiana Purchase, and it took a lot less than that. No more do you see these nomadic tribes of Native Americans. They're stuck on reservations. There's no more land to turn to. If you're down on the dumps economically, it used to be that if you couldn't make it in the east, just go west, find some land, find some opportunity. You know, that was gone. The Turner thesis, Frederick Jackson Turner, basically suggested that the frontier was a very important aspect of America, that it had a huge part in kind of developing an American identity, basically suggesting that as Americans moved westward into this frontier, it basically created people that were innovative, that had a can-do attitude, that were just tough people. Where there was the idea that you could always improve yourself, that there was lots of social mobility to be had, very much like this American dream. And Turner suggested that now that was gone, and we would have to seek new frontiers, perhaps, to continue to challenge us or to look for more opportunities. So, anyways, I think that's all I have for today, guys. That's the West. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. There's my email, my YouTube site, APUSH with Hyde, and my website, Google site there, where you'll find all my chapter PowerPoints as well as copies of my podcast. So, hope this helped, guys. Good luck on that test.